We are recorded. We're going 3, 2, 1. Slide 4, page 158, global management. Majority of this will be talking about interactions and ideas for networking or setting up a business on a global scale. We will examine the business in the global cycle in 2 ways. First, we'll explore the impact on the business as it follows the rules in global trade. Next, we'll examine how global trade is examined and trade-offs, your abilities to actually work in other places. Finally, we'll look at when you decide to expand, what are the best climates, how to adapt to different cultures, and discuss that and preparing the employees for their international assignments. First, let's get into some definitions. Multinational corporations are MNCs, any company and or business that operates in more than 2 countries. We are situated in Michigan, which is a stone's throw from Windsor. The fact that you could literally open up one satellite business in Windsor would automatically mean that you are now an international business. You are a multinational. Matter of fact, the major sports leagues try to incorporate the Canadian teams in some of their activities, so it is international. Baseball has the Toronto Blue Jays. Basketball has the Toronto Raptors. Technically, is an international sport. The advantages that you diversify makes it easier for you to actually acquire business from other areas. Disadvantage, in summary, is that you have the inability to expand because of cultural differences. Sometimes it does not work as well as you would think. There are a couple of ways that you can do this diversity. The first one is direct foreign investment. That's when you buy a business that exists somewhere else rather than you trying to actually adapt. We're going to get into Walmart's less than ideal situation. Moving on to page 160, there are 2 very interesting charts that show what it refers to. Direct foreign investment, you're taking your money and buying a company in another area. U.S. direct foreign investment abroad, referring to when we, as a country, buy companies in other areas. Difference between the 2 is rather interesting. Foreign companies that invest inside the United States total about $3 trillion. The United States investing in other countries totals about $5 trillion. GDP is close to $20 trillion, so you are looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5% as far as all activity net. It is not a small amount that it refers to. Large Western style civilizations, countries in particular, do quite a bit of international business. Always something to think about for future managers. The leaders as far as doing business inside the United States are the UK, Japan, Netherlands, Canada, Luxembourg, Sweden, Germany, France. Others take up the other ones. It almost works in the same avenue. Money that goes out, Netherlands, United Kingdom, Luxembourg, Canada, Ireland, Caribbean islands, Bermuda, Australia, Singapore, Switzerland. It's almost a reciprocal relationship. Those countries that tend to do a lot of business in the United States, there tends to be a lot of business from the United States to those countries. Tends to work back and forth. Now, slide 5. Book doesn't offer a really great transition for this, but sometimes countries, to protect their own interest, put up trade barriers of different types in order to avoid business from other countries coming in. Usually small countries want the money, but try to put up certain trade barriers to protect the country's self-interest. One of the primary things they try to protect is small cottage industries trying to grow. The trade-off is some large company, will still pick on Walmart, comes in, the mom and pop shop doesn't have a chance. They don't have the resources, so the trade barriers are usually to protect local interest. It is technically called protectionism. These things are used to, again, to make sure that what your local companies are doing is that they survive in this large global economy, and you do not have them being overthrown by large conglomerates coming in. Talked about physical barriers and other means rather than you putting in just a simple tax. A tariff is the simplest trade barrier there is. Money in place, next thing you know, you can't get your goods in at the same cost as the local market, and it's a discouraging action. There are non-tariff barriers, meaning I don't have to put in a dollar amount. I can do other things to discourage you from doing this. This is page 161 and 162. Book lists 5 different types. We'll go over these so you have some idea of what you face going into an international market. One is just a quota. You can only bring in so many cars, so many pounds of peanuts, whatever it is. Not allowed to exceed that. Second, voluntary restraints. These tend to work the best out of the group. You know you're going to run into a problem, so you don't flood the market. You self-impose limits on how much you can bring in. Therefore, the local government doesn't have a lot of problem. The local citizens don't have a problem. They get some of the money and activity, and you don't have to worry about you coming in overrunning them. The next, government can put up certain standards and barriers. Now, all they have to do is put in some type of restriction on what it is. Primarily, they can do this for health reasons. This tends to limit bringing in food items. Your country could manufacture sugarcane for a very cheap amount, actually cheaper than they can get it locally. Well, if they put in some type of trade barrier based upon health, because you're importing food, which is a reasonable thing to do, you tend to limit how much money can come in or how many goods and services can come in. Slide 7 on page 162. Government can balance that out with certain subsidies and trade barriers. Local governments can be given, or local businesses can be given grants, monies, other things to balance off. Therefore, their products are cheaper. You give me a subsidy of $1 and I use that per item, I can lower the price to match imports that are coming into the country. Again, this is to keep the local and domestic market happy. These are the things you face as far as trying to export your goods and services. The last, trying to regulate it through certain custom classifications. If you have your book, you'll notice that there's a picture of Santa Claus. What does that have to do with the price of tea in China, as the expression goes? Well, if you're looking at this, we have someone dressed as Santa Claus, and it lists how the classification of the Santa Claus costume is listed. Festive articles in this particular instance include the hat, the wig, and the beard. Because they're seen as more of a costume, they're classified in one area. The actual Santa costume itself is seen as apparel. That would carry a tariff. Obviously, it wouldn't do to your benefit dressing as Santa to get the beard and then come in a 3-piece leisure suit. Doesn't quite have the same effect. What you want to do is find out, this is a sticky point as far as you being a manager trying to get goods over, what are the barriers that you might face? The whole point is to do the research before you do this to understand, is it even worth it for you to do the exports? if the Santa costume is fine, how do I get the rest of it classified differently so I don't have to tariff? Even though you're only going to wear it at one point in time or a 2-week period out of the year, it is seen as a garment. August in the United States, you're probably not going to get away with wearing a Santa gear. We don't start celebrating Christmas until September anyway. Slide 8, certain trade agreements. This is where the bulk of this chapter is, and we'll just kind of get through this. This is more for knowledge than anything else, unless you plan on taking a lot of long economic classes and doing research on all of this. This is just for informational purposes and background. If you're going to be a manager and trying to understand how trade works, it's just reference material. Reducing world tariffs and other things. The main one that most people talk about is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. It is what's considered a global trade agreement meant to eliminate and reduce tariffs, limit government subsidies so you cannot provide additional money to make the products cheaper when you export them. Protections on intellectual and property rights. This was later replaced by the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. So this is kind of the father of the WTO, which is the better known. But it offers some information on how this was set up. Things that I pointed out. First, tariffs were cut by 40% worldwide by 2005. The tariffs were eliminated on specific goods. This is of great interest. Beer, alcohol, construction equipment, farmer equipment, furniture, medical equipment, paper, pharmaceutical steels, and toys. Stricter restrictions as far as subsidies, and again, protection for intellectual property, which, considering most of the world now's biggest movement tends to be on intellectual property, this is a big deal. This was meant to protect quite a few of the industries. The one that suffers the most, besides just the telephone industry or the cell phone industry, is the movie industry. Everyone bootlegs all these movies. Finally, that cost the studios quite a bit of money. Anyone can copy the movie with almost any equipment that is around. The idea is to prevent this from being done, or at least letting the government not pay any attention to it. Buy into the argument that China has government backing on its bootlegs, then you see what the issue is. From there, rather than just having this large global entity, and this is where you go actually for disputes. If there are any arguments between countries, if they are WTO members, they go to this court and they handle it. It is not handled between the two countries. This is considered the actual jurisdiction and courtroom for arguments between countries related to subsidies and other issues. Right now, the United States and the European Union are in a lovely trade dispute over whether or not Boeing and Airbus are giving subsidies to manufacture planes. Considering those are the only two companies actually doing large jets that are in service globally, it is a huge deal. Slide 9, again talking about the World Trade Organization, deals with remedies between different countries. Then we get into regional trade organizations. The reason that these are formed is it is sometimes better if you're in a neighboring country to actually get into specific trade rules. You can handle these things more directly than you're trying to worry about the WTO handling it. These are some of the major ones that are around the world. Again, once you get to the point where you're trying to do international trade, it's better for you to understand what's going on, because this may be direct competition to what you're doing. looking at these, in Africa, there's the African Free Trade Zone, also the Tripartite Free Trade Agreement. In Asia, there are a number of them due to its large geographic location. ASEAN, APEC, the TPP, which was the agreement the United States was getting into in the last administration, but the current administration backed out of this particular trade agreement, which has held up to quite a bit of skepticism as to whether or not it would be truly beneficial for the United States. Other arguments on that, on the other side of this particular debate, is the United States would have gotten into this agreement, it would have had a stronger hand as trying to control China. You'd have to do the research and pick a side as far as whether or not who's right in this instance. Maybe it's a little bit of both. It's usually never as clear cut as yes or no, but it's something to keep in mind. That was part of the reason that it was put in place. In Central America, they have the CAFTA. In Europe, that is the bigger one to think of, the Maastricht Treaty, which gave way to the EU, which is the forerunner for that. The European Union, as far as putting the trade in place to eliminate barriers, considering it's a Western style civilization and a lot of trade is going on, all those barriers were truly a pain. Trading between Poland, Spain, Belgium, and everything else, having train lines that cross the barriers in an instant, you're trying to do trade, dealing with different currency, it was a nightmare. The idea of having one currency to make it simple is a brilliant idea. They have to worry about the execution because they're all on slightly different banking ideas and taxation. They have to work all that out. But getting rid of it would be worse, infinitely worse in my opinion. NAFTA, which is replaced by whatever that new thing is, NAFTA rolls off the tongue a little better in my opinion. I still call it that. Trade agreement between the Canada, United States, and Mexico, which is wildly successful. South America has their own, as you can see. If you look in your textbook at 164, gets into a nice graph as far as how these trade agreements are put up, structured, a little history about that. I'm not going to get into the history at this point. If you wanted to get into some more detail, the material is there. Going to move on to page 166, free trade agreements, choices, competition, purchasing power. That is one of my favorites because of one or two little simple details in there. So this should have been talked about earlier, but we're going to get to it now. Why do we even have trade agreements? One reason is actually to eliminate competition or to limit competition. Most countries have quite a bit of free trade. Actually, we are third on a global scale. We're behind Switzerland and Singapore as far as free flowing of competition. The barriers are there to make local businesses whole, or to at least keep them from being overrun by competition from international businesses. The downside is consumers tend to pay more. It's easier for you, if there are goods that cannot be produced inside your borders, to get the material from somewhere else. A couple of examples. Champagne is only made from Champagne, France. True champagne comes from there. Olive oil, certain beers, certain wines, caviar, usually those really exclusive things that you're thinking about, they cannot be made locally. If they were, they would actually cost too much. The whole idea is to actually let the consumer get it at a much lower cost. Pick two extremes. from two different states in the United States just to prove the point. If you stayed in Alaska, how expensive would it be to grow pineapples? You could do it, but you'd need a large dome, a lot of heat and everything else to grow pineapples or sugar cane or anything else. It's simply easier to get to a point of calling over to Hawaii. I have a lot of lobsters. I'll trade you sugar cane and pineapples. It works a lot better for both parties, rather than both parties trying to structure it so, oh, lobsters don't normally grow here, it's too warm, this, that, and the other. If you're in Hawaii, we'll do something about that. And then you have to put all that in place. It'd be much cheaper to just to do the trades. Give us lobster, we'll give you the pineapples and sugar cane, so forth and so on. You think about that as far as between nations, it's the same reason. Sometimes it's just cheaper to get it from somewhere else. Global consistency. Multinational companies conduct business with different countries because of using their rules, guidelines, and other procedures. It's simply a value play. The involvement using management procedures purely suited to particular countries. In other words, you need to find out what's going on in the other country in order for this to make sense. I'm on slide 12. Now we're getting into that issue with other companies and how they handle these things. Can your company adapt to the local setting? This, if you ever take a marketing class, is where you see marketing failures. Walmart, as large as it is, does extremely poorly outside the United States. I'm trying to think of an instance where I read where they were succeeding. I cannot think of one. Textbooks gets into this as well. In most countries outside of Western style countries and pretty much outside the United States, land is at a premium. Walmart, under its current system, uses quite a bit of land, and they try to get you to buy what the text considers bulk. We would not, considering there are things such as Costco's and Sam's Club. But in other areas, they consider that bulk. You go to Walmart, where most people are used to going to the grocery store every day. They buy things that fresh. They go that day, cook it, and keep going. Most people, again, with smaller homes, don't have enough storage space either. United States, everyone has a refrigerator. They also have freezers as well. Freezers are ubiquitous. The problem you have with that situation is if the box of cereal is really large, you have no place to store it. The 5 and 10 pound bag of sugar seems simple enough, or meat is sold in huge bulks. Most people don't cook it all. They put it in a freezer bag, store it. You don't run into that in a lot of places throughout the world. We're unique. You run the risk of going against local systems, and Walmart has had to adapt. They actually break the store down to what would look like a small mom and pop shop in some instances. That's all they do. They don't get into those large stores around the world the way they do here. It just happens to coincide with a video I was looking at doing research, as we mentioned last time. The United States is known for a couple of unique things. One, our version of football. The other, besides McMansions, we're the only country in the world that has large pickups. The rest of the world pretty much doesn't have that particular item. You would think in the two other largest automobile markets, China and the EU, they would be very ubiquitous there. They're not. Ford F-150 is about 8 feet wide. The lanes in many European countries are 8 feet. You would run into a problem trying to fit between buildings, and they're known to be about 8 feet wide. Traffic coming in the other direction, scraping up against the side mirrors, it would be a nightmare. Pretty much they don't do it.
I think it would be a lot of fun to try to taken F-150 to Ireland to one of those scenic coastal roads. That's the speed limit is 100 clicks, and try to do that with the pickup with the lane that is approximately, I don't know, yeah.
Well, just
Um,
make sure your dash cam is on and we'll watch it on YouTube.
oh, that'll be a lot of fun for whoever is watching it after recovering the camera out of the ocean. Um, because on top of that, in Ireland, yeah, you drive on the left, and good luck with that. That's a lot of fun once.
No, not ready, Dad. Yeah. When I was looking at the video, it was entertaining, and I knew that was the reason. My first thought was gasoline is generally twice the price in Europe as the United States. So you want an F-150? Yeah, no, not gonna work. But I also remember the size. I was thinking of just the country roads, and they showing pictures of inside the city, traffic coming back the other direction. Then I really thought about it. Like you said, yeah, you doing 100 clicks and an F-150. Yeah, it would look good on YouTube just before the truck hit the ocean. Yep,
It's an amphibious truck.
it is now. Oh, I just keep thinking, back when they actually did, what is the name of the auto show? Darn, I can't think of it. On the BBC, the auto show. Top Gear. They were always doing the European cars. For whatever reason, the host, very wealthy, are enamored with American cars because they hardly see them, which was rather weird. The guy finally waited till he got his Ford Mustang GT and was going to take it out and test drive it, but it wouldn't start. I was thinking, typical Ford, fix or repair daily. It does work in the advantages in some areas, though, because you don't see it all the time. It works in the other side. For whatever reason, many, many years ago, the then Emperor of China bought a Buick because way back when it was as large as a limo. That love affair of Buick has never left. The reason that the Buick brand has survived and the other ones have slowly gone to the wayside is Buick is a luxury brand in China. Not Cadillac, Buick. For whatever reason, in China, the top of the heap, and it's going to cost you because of import taxes. And another way of showing off you have a great deal of money is to buy a Buick. Global business, slide 14. Imports and exports. Selling your goods and services somewhere else is simple definition of exporting. The textbook gets into the largest automobile plant in the world is in Spartanburg, South Carolina, owned by BMW. They are so proficient at that, most of the cars they sell go to China. I assume somehow, some way it is cheaper to build the cars there and ship them to China. I have no idea how this works logistically, but that is not the only time I've heard that happens. The Honda automobile plant in Ohio ships half of the cars back to Japan after they're made, which I found truly interesting. Subaru has a plant. Mercedes-Benz is in Alabama. Porsche has a testing facility in Florida. This is how you get back to trade And the idea that we're only consumers is wrong. We consume more than we send out, true enough, but there is a ton of business that is manufactured here and actually sent out. A lot of people don't know that. Be careful with the idea that we have to eliminate trade and everything else if you don't do the research. That would decimate some of these areas. The other side of that is if you want a foreign car, you want a BMW, go down to South Carolina because they can get them cheap. They're ubiquitous as General Motors cars are in Detroit. If you want a Mercedes-Benz, go to Alabama. In one of my other classes, we were bringing this up, and I kept making the jokes that, yeah, the idea of somebody working at the Mercedes plant putting the gun rack in there is kind of wrong, but it was funny for at least 3 or 4 classes because we kept bringing it up. There's the other side of that coin. You're going to face that. Once you have that established, you get into other things. Page 169, cooperations or cooperative contracts, generally franchising rights. Rather than you actually building it yourself, someone wants to just use your logos, and there you go. They do most of the work. You get a slight fee. As long as you keep up the quality, everything is great. Franchising, and you're thinking about McDonald's. If you didn't read this section in the book, I'm going to cut to this because I found this really interesting. They talked about the McDonald's franchising fees. You got to pay that every year, 1 to 3 million or so forth to put the plant up, et cetera, et cetera. That wasn't what interests me. What interests me was the slight adjustments you make to local culture. In Hong Kong, the Pizza Hut is a flying fish, raw salmon, cream cheese pizza, topped with shrimp, crawfish, clams, and scallops. In Australia, it's a hot dog stuffed pizza crust. In South Korea, a dessert stuffed crust with cream cheese, cranberries, or cinnamon apple nut pizza with sausage, steak, bacon, and calamari on top. Burger King has a Sufganeh King Whopper. Fried donuts cut in half to use as the bun. Yeah, there's a heart attack waiting to happen. This last one here in New Zealand was the one that stuck out. A meatarian, bacon, chicken, beef, barbecue sauce, and it is called a kuro. Black charred bun, black cheese made with charcoal bamboo, and black sauce. If you have your textbook at it, you'll look at it, it looks like a hockey puck. I thought they were doing something to darken and make the color look that way. That is sheared. The black sauce is made from black squid ink. Yeah, not exactly what I was thinking. That was out in Japan. It was more than a reason to go because you're getting black squid ink on your burger. Strategic alliances, 171, slide 16. Rather than you going it alone, you get in a joint venture, building up with other competitors in the area, or should I say partners in the area. It saves cost and research on both parties. The local company gets an influx of cash. You get into another market without doing as much research. They know the lay of the land. It's simply a lot easier for you. So if you're thinking of expanding, you're a manager, you've been given that project, keeping in mind what we're talking about is whether or not these ideas make sense. Do you bring in your product? Do you do the strategic alliance? Slide 17, wholly owned alliances. You don't necessarily bring your brand in, you just buy out a company, use that in there. Again, ways to expand your market in other areas and to diversify your portfolio. Still on slide 17, the whole idea of rather than you doing this is a new global venture. I've heard of these things being done, but they still don't quite make sense to me because of everything else that we've discussed. You don't know the lay of the land. Is it something that ubiquitous that you can throw out anywhere and you don't need to make a change? In a global venture, you just put it out there globally and it's the same product all at once. Aside from tech, and even then you'd have to change the languages, I can't think of too many things that would fall into this category. It would have to be something really ubiquitous that you don't need to change at all. The only thing that comes to mind immediately is Coca-Cola. It's the same formula everywhere. The logo looks a little differently, the wording's a little differently, but it's the white swoosh. That is it. If you ever have this idea, I would think about it 2 and 3 times. This to me just created the most dangerous model of everything that we've talked about so far. I don't know what you would do or how you would do it, but I assume this can be done. It just seemed a little dangerous in my opinion, to put it lightly. When we're talking about you trying to find other areas to go, you have to figure out the climate in the country, meaning the background. Looking at the trade barriers that we already talked about. Do you have a language barrier? Do you have a culture barrier? The other area is this someplace that's actually meant for economic growth, or is it in the cash cow phase or the mature phase of its market? So you're not going to get a lot of growth. You're just going to be trying to compete with other businesses for an existing market. There's no growth in the United States for almost most things. There's no growth for Starbucks, McDonald's. You're just competing against one another. That's it. Purchasing power. Page 172. This gets into the Big Mac Index. You and other countries run into the issue as what to charge more than anything else for the same good. Already talked about the different items. There's a Hawaiian Big Mac, which doesn't have a meat patty. It has a pineapple in it. This was put together by The Economist, the magazine, if you've ever heard of it. Essentially what they do is they figure out how much your currency is worth against another currency by trying to figure out something that's ubiquitous. The Big Mac is what they picked. How long it takes someone to buy a Big Mac per hour compared to another country. Using the United States obviously as the benchmark, this to me is one of the better ways to figure out what your currency is worth, more than anything else, because it's something we all understand. I love this idea. And they publish this once a year, and it's meant to figure out, again, the value of your currency against something else as far as purchasing power. Trying to find where you should set up shop. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on this one. This is something that you kind of get through just by reading over this, but you're trying to figure out more than anything else the quality of the workforce. The location, that is an issue of whether or not you need to pay bribes. There are actually some pretty good books that I've read that talked about the difficulty with other countries is not so much all these other things, trades, it's actually the local areas. Do you actually have to pay bribes? In some countries, they actually expect you to pay bribes. There are some US companies and European countries that have been fined because they're paying bribes, but that is just the norm of the society where they're operating. It's seen as a bad thing to do, but it's, again, their culture. The other areas that we already talked about, trade barriers, exchange rate, transportation costs, material costs, and so forth and so on. But the physical location and locally what you got to pay for, that is a huge issue. One of those large charts as far as where's some of the best place to do business. As you can see, as you would imagine, these are Western style civilizations. Print is rather small on slide 21, so I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. But the worst ones are the ones I would avoid. Venezuela, the quick story on that one. General Motors had a plant in Venezuela. I believe the plant made under 5,000 cars a year. well under it, if I remember correctly. In the last bit of political turmoil, they pretty much just sent General Motors a note telling them, we took over the plant, don't expect anything for it. Literally, they just told General Motors, your plant is gone, you don't own anything. And as soon as they have political stability, General Motors will be back because it's an area that doesn't have a lot of cars. There's growth. It doesn't make sense to most people, but they know you have to run the risk, write it off. That's just part of doing business, and understand if it works, it's a gold mine. If it doesn't, you have to write it off and chalk it up as a loss. Problems that you face as far as the political or expanding, slide 22, and the rest of these are just more information, is not as much data as the ones I wanted to really touch across. Political and policy uncertainty, again, for the obvious reasons. If they don't have a stable government, you have a problem. There's also kind of a McDonald's index on that as well. I think it stopped holding water about 5 years ago, but there was something an economist noted. Anywhere where there is a McDonald's, they have not seen an actual fight with another country that has a McDonald's. I think that's been shot a hole in that one in 5 years or so because of increasing political upheaval. But for a long period of time, if there are two countries that had a McDonald's, they did not go to war. It doesn't mean they were friendly, but it means that McDonald's at least felt that the country was stable enough where they could put a McDonald's in there and leave it. If you want to use that as a guide and you're a potential expander, that's one. If someone else won't go into the backyard, you shouldn't be the first one. If you're a small company anyway and expanding, McDonald's can afford to throw away the money, particularly if they're doing franchising. You may not want to. So look at it this way. This is a guide. Should I get into this other country? If there isn't a KFC, if there isn't a Starbucks, don't go.
Wasn't there a McDonald's franchise in Mogadishu in Somalia after what's his name died? Farah Aidid, after he died, and it's somehow kind of stabilized for a very short period of time, but well, long story short, it didn't end well.
That, yeah, they pulled the trigger too soon there. Like I said, it was holding up for quite some time. I think 5-10 years. It finally got broken, but for the most part, McDonald's doesn't go there. You don't want to go there. They were getting a little full of themselves. They should have waited till they knew it was stable, but they probably wanted to be first one in to set the bar. It's the only thing I can think of. This gets back to our other things as far as political, avoiding risk. You're talking about other countries. You want to diversify your business. This is the reason for it, but the political risk is the other side of not getting into different countries. Whether or not you can have any control or lobbying abilities, let's be honest, you're trying to talk to the leaders of the countries, whether it's the tribal leader or the prince, emperor, sheik, whatever it may be. There's where you're trying to find your money to get in. Not exactly a bribe, but you might as well call it a bribe. Trying to get a local cooperation with the existing businesses, they may already have the political pull. There's no point in you trying to do it. Getting with someone who already knows, again, the lay of the land, you avoid the whole thing. Cultural differences. Textbook doesn't get into enough jokes. Not really. You should know the lay of the land. Certain areas, they don't eat meat. You don't want to go to, say, India and some areas where they think cows are sacred and open a McDonald's unless you got something else you want to put in there, like lamb. Look up, if you ever get a chance, marketing failures. You don't understand the lay of the land. GE, in certain countries, they did not have appliances. People would put like the washing machine or the stove in the front room in some countries to show how wealthy you are, and it made sense. Here, everyone has a refrigerator. They left those appliances early on. This is quite some time ago in some countries to show how wealthy they were. The flip side of that was GE, using standard measurements for American doors, sold appliances that would not fit through the doors in certain countries because they were 2 to 3 inches smaller doorways. There was no way to get it in unless you destroyed the door frame. You weren't going to crush the appliance to get it in. My other favorite example of a failure is Gerber Baby Food tried to get into certain developing countries in Africa and did not sell anything. Everything got shipped back and they could not figure out why. It's a classic example of you not getting some local feedback and understanding the territory where you're at. They shipped it and they thought they translated to baby food. Somehow the translate got it to the point where they thought it was ground up babies to be sold as food. If you don't know the lay of the land, you better not even go over there. That ridiculous mistake. The last one I can think of is General Motors had a car named Vega, which is Spanish for no go. Avoid that kind of thing. The rest of this goes into that particular situation, understanding differences and recognizing the cultural differences between countries. Understand those things before you get into some mess, please.
So there goes my dream of having a pig farm in Afghanistan.
Yeah,
Oh,
that wouldn't work. No, you might want to redo that one. Still could happen though. Keep hope alive. Language and cultural differences, again, I think I've given examples for that. Just be careful about what you're doing. Know the language. This is one of my personal pet peeves, the United States being high and mighty. By default, we spend too much on military. I would spend it on education, and I would make sure a language would be required. You could pick the language if you wanted to. My preference would be Spanish, followed by German and a few other of the large languages. Mandarin is, of course, the top 5 languages used for business should be taught in the United States. It shouldn't be an elective.
That's interesting because I'm taking a business communications class, business writing, and we just went over resumes, and they said the one thing that you should take off your resume now is if you know multiple languages, even if you're fluent. They said it's not, as of 2016 and forward, they said it's not required, nor is it necessary. It takes up too much space in your resume.
Who said this?
It was the two different articles we had to write or had to read regarding the business communications or the business writing class we took.
Pardon my French. Hell no.
Well, you're looking at it from a management perspective. So that makes, and from what you're saying, it makes total sense. If you know a language and are fluent, that would only benefit the company.
Go to any company, any Fortune 500 company. They will pay you extra if you have a second language. Go to any bank. They have signs. If you need an interpreter, wait, we'll get somebody for you. Well, you have to pay that person extra. I can't think of under any circumstances where speaking multiple languages is down.
Well, it was, and I don't know how credible the sources are because it was just posted on D2L from the professor, but it was how to update your resume for 2016, 2020. So the articles are written in 2016. It's just, it's interesting to see I would have to agree with you. I'm not fluent in any language other than just English, but
I'm, I'm sorry, my head is still recovering from the explosion. What large
I'll send you the
company?
articles if you want.
You
I
can
mean,
send them to me, please, because I need to scream at something, and that would help me. You know what? The rest of it deals with cultural issues, successful screening, and then we get into term. This is probably as good a place as any to stop because I don't think I can go any further. My head is about
I'm
to
sorry, I didn't mean
explode.
to make your day bad. I'm just listening, going. I'm hearing two different things in the same, in two different classes.
Okay,
So from a European perspective,
Yeah,
okay.
let us know.
that's BS because when when looking into how the European Parliament functions, so you have Belgium, France, you have all these countries, Germany somewhere in the mix of it. So the European Parliament could not agree on an official language, meaning there are at least, no, there's all three major languages are present. So English, Spanish, French. So, but the European Parliament could not agree to say, okay, everybody is speaking English or everybody is speaking French, Spanish, whatever. They couldn't agree on it. So every participating nation in the European Parliament has their own interpreters. So everybody's sitting there with headsets, and when somebody from um, Belgium is talking, then there's somebody, there's an interpreter interpreting it to German. There is
Oh
an
God.
English person. Well, no, no, forget England. No, forget that Brexit. Yeah, that's done and over with. Anyway, but there is a French interpreter um, interpreting whatever that Belgium person is saying into French because it is kind of like French, but not entirely, not exactly, and so forth. So it is tremendously, in my opinion, it's a tremendous waste of money. But hey, you know what? It's the taxpayers' money, so who cares? So
But if you
I would
knew,
I would say for ease of math, why don't you just go with English, or why even pick French? And everybody is supposed to speak French.
and I know that the K through 12 schools, you have to have a separate, like, another additional language in order to graduate.
I
Well, I'm really happy that I'm fluent in six languages then. It's great.
6?
Yeah,
Congratulations.
nah, it's English, German, English drunk, German drunk, sarcasm, and bullcrap. So,
Oh, sorry.
ah
yeah, but that's if you have the ability to speak multiple languages, I mean, so there was once upon a time, of course, but like in the U.S. military and the army, if you could speak multiple languages, even if you were enlisted, if you were like an E5 and E6 or whatever, they would pay you extra money only because you could speak that language. Whether you were stationed in that country or no, didn't make a difference. And now, so when I was back in Germany and working with some special forces, they had language labs and language classes because so their area of operations obviously is the Middle East, and so they were training their soldiers different uh, like accents for certain areas. So whenever they jump out of an airplane and come down with a parachute, they are not worried about, what's going on the ground. They're very well aware of it. They're just like, okay, so which dialect do I have to talk now?
Sure.
So they were really good at it, and they were paying a lot of money for, or are still paying a lot of money for those language labs. So why wouldn't it be beneficial for somebody to speak multiple languages.
Yeah. Well, unless.
Send me the ad. That's
Okay.
fine. I would just lose what little mind I have. Send it to me so I can post it up on the Facebook site so I can argue it. Give me something to do today. I was wondering what else I had an article today to type on. This one, yeah. Okay.
Well, like I don't know I didn't check the credible sources, but I will send it to you.